My name is Father Vincent Lampert, and for nearly 2 decades, I've served as an exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. My work is not about chasing thrills or battling demons for the sake of drama. It's about bringing the light of Christ into the darkest corners of human experience, where fear and evil try to take hold. In the fall of 2006, I received a call that would lead me into one of the most intense spiritual battles of my ministry, a battle against a demon named Astaroth, a name that carries weight in the annals of demonology, known for sowing fear and manipulating the minds of the vulnerable. This is the story of the Thompson family, a family caught in the grip of something far beyond the ordinary and the fight to reclaim their home and their souls. It was a gray, chilly afternoon in late October when my phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Sarah Thompson, a 5-year-old single mother living in a small working-class town in Indiana. Her voice trembled, not just with fear, but with a kind of desperation that I've come to recognize in those who feel they're up against something they can't explain. "Father, I don't know what's happening," she said, her words spilling out in a rush. "My kids, they're not themselves. There's something in our house. I need help." I've heard calls like this before, people frightened by strange noises, unexplained events, or a sense of unease. But there was something in Sarah's voice, a raw edge of terror, that told me this was different. I told her I'd come to their home on Maple Street as soon as I could. The drive to their house took me through the heart of Indiana's Rust Belt, past rows of modest homes and faded storefronts. The Thompson family lived in a 2-story house, maybe 1,200 square feet, with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. It wasn't much to look at, but Sarah had rented it, hoping for a fresh start after a tough few years. She lived there with her 2 children, Ethan, a lanky 4-year-old with a quiet demeanor, and Lily, a bright-eyed 0-year-old who seemed too small for the weight she was carrying, and her mother, Margaret, a 60-year-old widow who clung to her faith like a lifeline. As I pulled into the driveway, the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, though the sky was clear. I've learned over the years that evil has a way of making its presence felt, not in dramatic flourishes, but in subtle, oppressive ways that cling to you like damp cold. Sarah met me at the door, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She was a petite woman, maybe 5 feet 3 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Behind her stood Ethan, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. Lily clung to her mother's side, clutching a stuffed rabbit that looked like it had seen better days. Margaret, a stout woman with graying hair, stood in the background, her hands clasped tightly around a rosary. The house itself was tidy but worn, faded wallpaper, a creaky wooden staircase, and a living room with a single couch and a small television. But the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. A heaviness, like the air itself, was pressing down on me. It wasn't just the dim light or the musty smell of an old house. It was something else, something watching, waiting. Sarah sat me down at the kitchen table, a scratched-up wooden thing, barely big enough for 4. She poured me a cup of coffee, her hand shaking as she set it in front of me. "It started a few weeks after we moved in," she began. "At first, it was little things. Doors creaking open at night, footsteps in the hallway when we were all in bed. I thought maybe it was the house settling. You know, old houses make noises." She paused, glancing at Ethan, who hadn't spoken a word. "But then it got worse. There's this smell, like something rotting, but we can't find where it's coming from. And the kids," her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands, twisting a napkin into knots. Lily spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I see him in my dreams, Father, a man with no face. He says his name is Astaroth, and he wants me to do things, bad things." Her words sent a chill through me. Astaroth is no ordinary demon. In demonology, he's known as a Grand Duke of Hell, a deceiver who preys on the vulnerable, twisting their thoughts and feeding on their fear. I've encountered many spirits in my work, but names like Astaroth carry a particular weight. They're not just manifestations of evil, they're calculated, intelligent, and relentless. I kept my expression calm, not wanting to alarm Lily further. "Tell me more about this man," I said gently, leaning forward. "He's tall," she said, her eyes wide. "He wears a black cloak, and his face, it's just shadows. He says, if I don't listen to him, he'll hurt my family. Sarah reached for Lily's hand, squeezing it tightly. Ethan, still silent, shifted in his chair, his fists clenched. I turned to him. Ethan, have you seen anything, felt anything? He didn't look up, but his jaw tightened. I don't want to talk about it, he muttered, his voice low and rough, like he was holding something back. Margaret spoke up then, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. Father, I'm a woman of faith. I prayed the rosary every day for 40 years, but something's wrong in this house. I've seen shadows moving in the corners. I felt hands pushing me when no one's there. I listened as Sarah filled in more details. The family had moved in 3 months earlier, hoping to escape the stress of a recent divorce and financial struggles. The house on Maple Street was cheap, a bargain in a town where rentals were hard to come by. But within weeks, the strange occurrences began. Footsteps echoed in the upstairs hallway at 2 a.m. The smell of decay would appear and vanish without explanation. Once, Sarah found the kitchen cabinets wide open, every dish neatly stacked on the counter, though no one had touched them. Ethan had changed the most, she said. He'd always been a good kid, a bit shy but kind. Now he was angry, snapping at his mother, breaking things in fits of rage. One night, he punched a hole in his bedroom wall, claiming he didn't remember doing it. Margaret added her own account, her voice trembling but resolute. Last week, I was praying in my room when I heard a voice. It wasn't human, Father. It said, "Get out or you'll die." I looked around, but there was no one. Then I felt something push me, hard, right here. She touched her shoulder, where a faint bruise was visible under her sleeve. I nodded, taking it all in. These were classic signs of what we in the church call infestation, the first stage of demonic activity where an evil presence begins to take hold of a place, testing the waters before moving to the next stage. Oppression or possession, I asked to see the house. Sarah led me through the narrow rooms, the air growing colder as we moved upstairs. Ethan's bedroom was at the end of the hall, a small space with a single bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the backyard. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My breath was visible in the air, though it was a mild 60-degree Fahrenheit outside. I noticed a faint scratch mark on the wall near Ethan's bed, about 3 feet long, too high for a child to make. "Did you do this?" I asked him. He shook his head, his eyes avoiding mine. "It was there when I woke up," he said, his voice barely audible. Lily's room was next, decorated with pastel colors and stuffed animals. But even here, the air felt wrong, like a weight pressing on my chest. Sarah pointed to a small mirror on the dresser. "That broke last night," she said. "No one touched it. We just heard a crash, and there it was, in pieces." I examined the shards, noticing they were scattered in a perfect circle, as if arranged deliberately. Downstairs, in the living room, Margaret showed me a crucifix hanging above the fireplace. "It moves sometimes," she said. "Not much, just a little sway, like someone's nudging it." I placed my hand on the crucifix, praying silently, and felt a faint vibration, like a pulse, though the house was still. I returned to the kitchen and sat with the family. "What you're experiencing is real," I told them. "But it's not stronger than God. The devil wants you to be afraid because fear is how he gains control. But with faith, with prayer, we can fight this." I explained that I'd need to do a minor exorcism, a blessing of the house, to assess the situation further. But I suspected this was more than a simple haunting. Astaroth's name had been spoken, and that meant we were dealing with a calculated evil, one that wouldn't leave without a fight. I began the blessing that same afternoon, walking through the house with holy water and my Roman ritual, a book of prayers and rites I've carried since my training in Rome. As I sprinkled holy water in each room, reciting prayers in Latin, the air seemed to grow heavier, resisting me. In Ethan's room, the temperature dropped again, and a low hum, like static, filled the space. I prayed louder, calling on the name of Jesus Christ, and the hum stopped abruptly. But as I moved to the hallway, I heard a sound, a sharp, guttural hiss, like air escaping a tire, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sarah gasped, and Lily buried her face in her mother's arm. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes locked on the ceiling, as if he saw something I couldn't. I finished the blessing, but the heaviness lingered. I told Sarah to keep a journal of any unusual events and to call me immediately if things escalated. Pray together, I urged them. The Rosary, the Lord's Prayer, anything that strengthens your faith, the devil hates that. As I left the house, I glanced back at the windows. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the glass, but when I looked again, it was gone. I drove back to my parish, the weight of Maple Street still on my shoulders, knowing this was only the beginning. In my years as an exorcist, I've learned that evil doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in, subtle and insidious, exploiting cracks in our faith, our hope, our love. The Thompson family was under attack, and Astaroth was no ordinary adversary. But I also knew that no demon, no matter how powerful, could stand against the power of Christ. I prepared myself for what lay ahead, trusting in God's grace to guide me. The battle for the Thompson souls had begun, and I was ready to fight. The days following my initial visit to the Thompson family's home on Maple Street were marked by an uneasy quiet, the kind that feels more like the calm before a storm than true peace. I kept in close contact with Sarah Thompson, urging her to document every unusual occurrence, no matter how small. As an exorcist, I've learned that the devil often works in the details, small disturbances that build into chaos if left unchecked. Sarah's journal, which she shared with me a week later, painted a chilling picture of a household under siege, not by dramatic displays, but by a creeping, relentless dread that was tearing the family apart. Sarah, a 5-year-old mother of 2, was doing her best to hold things together. Her children, Ethan, 14, and Lily, 10, were struggling in ways that went beyond normal teenage angst or childhood fears. Margaret, Sarah's 60-year-old mother, was a pillar of faith, but even she was shaken by what was unfolding in their modest 1,200 square foot home in a small Indiana town. The house, with its peeling paint and creaky floors, had seemed like a fresh start when they moved in 3 months earlier, but now it was a battleground. The name Astaroth, spoken by young Lily in a trembling whisper, lingered in my mind. A Grand Duke of Hell known for manipulating minds and sowing despair, Astaroth was not a presence to be taken lightly. When I returned to the house a week after the initial blessing, Sarah handed me her journal, its pages filled with hurried, anxious handwriting. The entries detailed a series of escalating disturbances. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the family was woken by the sound of heavy footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway, though no one was there. The next night, the smell of decay, a sickly, rotting odor filled the kitchen, forcing Sarah to open all the windows despite the 40-degree Fahrenheit chill outside. She'd searched for the source, checking the fridge, the trash, even the crawl space under the house, but found nothing. It's like the house itself is rotting, she wrote. Another entry described how the lights flickered in a pattern 3 short bursts, then a long pause every night at the same time, 2:15 a.m. The children were suffering most. Ethan, once a quiet but cheerful boy who loved basketball, had become a stranger. Sarah wrote that he'd started speaking in a low, guttural tone, saying things that made no sense, like fragments of a language she didn't recognize. One evening, he'd stood in the living room, staring at a blank wall for 20 minutes, muttering to himself. When Sarah asked what he was doing, he turned to her with a blank expression and said, "He's telling me what to do." When she pressed him, he snapped, throwing a glass across the room, shattering it against the fireplace. It wasn't Ethan, Sarah wrote. His eyes, they weren't his. Lily's experiences were different, but no less disturbing. The 10-year-old, who still clutched her stuffed rabbit for comfort, had stopped sleeping through the night. She told Sarah she was afraid to close her eyes because Astaroth was waiting in her dreams. "He's always there," Lily said during my visit, her voice barely audible as she sat curled up on the couch. "He says he owns this house, and we can't leave unless we give him what he wants." When I asked what that was, she hesitated, then whispered, "Me." Her words hit me like a punch. Astaroth, like many demons, targets the innocent, using their vulnerability to gain a foothold. I placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet prayer, and gave her a small medal of St. Michael the Archangel. "Keep this with you," I said. "He's stronger than any demon." Margaret's entries in the journal were fewer but no less troubling. A devout Catholic who'd prayed the rosary daily for decades, she described feeling a physical presence in the house. "It's like someone standing behind me all the time," she wrote. One night, while praying in her bedroom, she felt a sharp push against her back, hard enough to knock her to her knees. She looked around, expecting to see Ethan or Sarah, but the room was empty. The next morning, she found a handprint on her bedroom window, too large to belong to anyone in the family, with elongated fingers that looked almost clawed. "I've never been afraid to pray," she wrote, "but now I feel like something's trying to stop me." I sat with the family in their cramped living room, the same crucifix from my first visit still hanging above the fireplace. It hadn't moved since, but the air felt heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I asked Ethan to join us, but he refused, staying in his room upstairs. His absence worried me. In cases of demonic oppression, the evil spirit often isolates its target, cutting them off from support. I decided to check on him later, but first, I needed to understand the full scope of what we were dealing with. Sarah's exhaustion was palpable. She hadn't slept more than a few hours a night, and the strain was etched into her face, dark circles under her eyes, her hands trembling as she poured more coffee. "Father, I don't know how much longer we can take this," she said. "I'm scared for my kids. Ethan's not himself. And Lily, she's so young. Why is this happening to us?" It's a question I hear in every case, and the answer is never simple. Evil doesn't need a reason to attack. It looks for opportunities, cracks in a person's faith or life where it can slip in. I didn't know what had opened the door for Astaroth, but I suspected it was more than just the house. Something in the family's past, perhaps a trauma or a moment of despair, had given the demon a foothold. I asked to see the upstairs again, this time focusing on the areas where the disturbances were most frequent. As we climbed the narrow staircase, the temperature dropped noticeably, maybe 15 degrees colder than the living room. The hallway was dark, even with the lights on, and the air felt thick, like walking through fog. In Lily's room, I noticed her drawings scattered on the floor, childlike sketches of flowers and animals, but among them were darker images, jagged stars, spiraling shapes, and a figure in a black cloak with no face. "Did you draw these?" I asked. She nodded, tears welling up. "He makes me," she said. "I don't want to, but he's in my head." Ethan's room was worse. The scratch mark I'd seen before was still there, but now it was joined by others, forming a pattern that looked almost deliberate, like runes or symbols. The room smelled faintly of sulfur, a scent I've encountered in other cases, unmistakable and unnatural. Ethan sat on his bed, staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. "Ethan," I said softly, "can you tell me what's happening?" He didn't respond at first, but then he looked up, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to flicker, like a shadow passing over them. "You can't help us," he said, his voice flat, but laced with something darker. "He's stronger than you." I've heard those words before. Demons love to boast, to intimidate. But I've also learned that their bravado is a mask for weakness. "Ethan," I said firmly, "whatever's in this house, it's not stronger than God. You don't have to fight this alone." He didn't answer, but his hands relaxed slightly, and I took that as a small victory. I sprinkled holy water around the room, praying the prayer to St. Michael, and the sulfur smell faded, though the cold lingered. Back downstairs, I gathered the family and explained the next steps. "What you're experiencing is what we call infestation," I said. "It's the first stage, where a demon makes its presence known, testing your resolve. But we can fight it with faith, prayer, and the sacraments." I gave them a plan: attend Mass regularly, pray the rosary together, and keep blessed objects in the house. I also recommended a psychological evaluation for Ethan and Lily, not because I doubted the demonic nature of their experiences, but to rule out any natural causes. The Church is careful in these matters, and so am I. Evil is real, but so are mental health struggles, and the two can be confused if we're not thorough. Before I left, I performed another minor blessing, this time focusing on the family themselves. I anointed each of them with holy oil, praying for protection. As I touched Ethan's forehead, he flinched, pulling away as if the oil burned him. It was a small reaction, but it confirmed my suspicions. Whatever was in this house had its sights set on him. I gave Sarah a bottle of holy water and a prayer card with a prayer to St. Michael. "Use these every day," I said, "and call me if anything changes." As I drove away, the house on Maple Street loomed in my rearview mirror, its windows dark and unyielding. I knew this was only the beginning. Astaroth was testing the family, probing their weaknesses, but I also knew that faith is stronger than fear. I returned to my parish and began preparing for what I suspected would be a full exorcism. I contacted the Archdiocese to request permission, a process that requires careful documentation and approval from the bishop. In the meantime, I prayed for the Thompsons, asking God to strengthen them for the battle ahead. That night as I knelt in my chapel, I felt a weight settle over me, not fear, but a sense of resolve. Astaroth was a formidable enemy, but I've faced darkness before. In Rome, under the guidance of my mentor, Father Carmine de Philippus, I learned that an exorcist's greatest weapon is not bravado or theatrics, but humility and trust in God's power. The Thompson family was counting on me, and I was counting on Christ. The signs were clear, the battle lines drawn. Whatever Astaroth had planned, we would face it together, armed with the light of faith. The Thompson family's home on Maple Street had become a battleground, not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and will. After my second visit, where the signs of infestation grew undeniable footsteps in the night, a sulfuric stench, and disturbing changes in Ethan and Lily, I knew we were dealing with something far beyond natural explanation. The name Astaroth, spoken by young Lily with trembling fear, pointed to a demon of ancient malevolence, a Grand Duke of Hell known for his cunning and ability to twist minds into despair. As Father Vincent Lampert, exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, my role was clear: to bring the light of Christ into this darkness, to protect this family, and to confront the evil that sought to claim them. A week after my last visit, I returned to the Thompson home with a heavier heart and a clearer purpose. Sarah Thompson, now visibly worn, greeted me at the door. Her 3 5-year-old frame seemed to carry the weight of years, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Her children, Ethan, 14, and Lily, 10, were in the living room sitting apart from each other, a stark contrast to the closeness they once shared. Margaret, Sarah's 6 0-year-old mother, stood by the kitchen, her rosary beads clicking softly as she prayed. The house felt colder than before, despite the furnace humming in the background. The air was thick, not just with the chill of an Indiana fall, but with a palpable sense of resistance, as if the very walls were pushing back against my presence. Sarah handed me her journal, its pages now filled with new, unsettling entries. The disturbances had grown more brazen. One night, the family woke to the sound of glass shattering, only to find every picture frame in the living room turned upside down, their glass fronts intact, but the photos inside torn to shreds. Another entry described a faucet in the bathroom turning on by itself, spewing water so hot it steamed up the mirror where the word "mine" appeared, scrawled in condensation. Sarah wrote, "It's like the house is alive, Father. It's watching us." Ethan's behavior had worsened. He'd taken to locking himself in his room, refusing to eat with the family. When Sarah tried to coax him out, he'd scream in a voice that didn't sound like his own, words laced with venom. "You can't keep me here forever." Lily's experiences were even more troubling. She'd stopped drawing altogether, her crayons untouched since the disturbing sketches of Astaroth I'd seen last time. Instead, she'd begun sleepwalking, something she'd never done before. Sarah found her one night standing in the backyard, barefoot in the 35-degree Fahrenheit cold, staring at the sky. When asked what she was doing, Lily said, "He told me to come outside. He said the stars belong to him." The mention of Astaroth again sent a shiver through me. Demons often use dreams and altered states to manipulate, and Lily's innocence made her a prime target. I knew we couldn't delay any longer. Ethan and Lily needed protection, and the house needed to be confronted head on. Before proceeding, I insisted on ruling out natural causes. I arranged for Ethan and Lily to see a pediatrician and a psychologist, standard practice in my work as an exorcist. The church requires us to be thorough to ensure we're not mistaking mental illness or medical issues for demonic activity. The pediatrician found nothing physically wrong with either child, though Ethan's blood pressure was elevated, likely from stress. The psychologist, Dr. Emily Carter, spent an hour with each child. She called me afterward, her voice uneasy. Lily's fear seems genuine, but it's hard to pin down, she said. She's articulate, but she keeps talking about this man with no face, like he's real. Ethan, I don't know. He's withdrawn, almost hostile. He wouldn't talk about his feelings, but he said something strange. You can't fix what's already broken. I've never heard a kid say that. Dr. Carter's report confirmed what I suspected. This wasn't just psychological. Ethan's hostility and Lily's visions pointed to oppression, the second stage of demonic activity, where the evil spirit begins to target individuals, not just the environment. I decided to conduct a more intensive investigation of the house, this time bringing along a deacon from my parish, Deacon James, a steady man with a deep faith who'd assisted me in previous cases. We arrived at the Thompson home on a Saturday morning, the sky overcast and a light drizzle falling, turning the streets of the small Indiana town into a slick gray sheen. Inside, the house felt different, more hostile. The temperature was a chilly 55-degree Fahrenheit, despite the thermostat set to 70. As we walked through the living room, I noticed the crucifix above the fireplace was slightly askew, as if someone had nudged it. Margaret whispered, "It's been doing that every day, Father." I fix it, and it moves again. I straightened it, praying silently, and felt a faint resistance, like a magnet repelling my hand. Deacon James carried a small case with blessed objects, holy water, a relic of St. Benedict, and a copy of the Roman ritual. We began a systematic blessing, starting in the living room and moving upstairs, praying the Litany of the Saints as we went. In Lily's room, the air was stifling, despite an open window letting in the cool fall breeze. Her stuffed rabbit lay on the bed, its head twisted at an unnatural angle, as if someone had wrung its neck. Sarah gasped when she saw it. "That was fine this morning," she said, her voice trembling. I sprinkled holy water on the bed, praying for protection, and the room seemed to lighten slightly, but the oppressive feeling didn't fully lift. We moved to Ethan's room, where the scratch marks on the wall had multiplied, now forming a jagged circle, about 3 feet in diameter, etched deep into the plaster. The sulfur smell was stronger here, sharp and acrid, stinging my nose. Deacon James coughed, his eyes watering. "Father, this isn't right," he said quietly. I nodded, continuing the prayers, but I could feel the resistance growing, like a current pushing against us. Ethan was in his room, sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. He didn't acknowledge us at first, his eyes fixed on a spot above my head. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm, "we're here to help you. Can you talk to me?" He didn't move, but his lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "You're wasting your time, priest," he said, his voice low and deliberate, with a cadence that didn't belong to a 4-year-old. "This house is mine. They're mine." My heart sank, but I didn't flinch. I've heard demons speak through people before, and I knew this was Astaroth testing me. I raised my crucifix, a simple wooden one I've carried since my training in Rome, and began the prayer of exorcism for a place, not a person, commanding any evil presence to depart in the name of Jesus Christ. The reaction was immediate. The room shook, a low rumble like a distant train, and the light bulb overhead flickered violently before bursting with a pop, showering glass onto the floor. Sarah screamed, pulling Lily close, while Margaret clutched her rosary, praying aloud. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, they seemed to glow. A trick of the light or something more sinister. "You think your words can stop me?" he growled, his voice layered with another, deeper tone. "I am Astaroth, and I've walked this earth longer than your pathetic faith. I didn't engage the demon, that's what it wants, to draw you into its game. Instead, I continued praying, my voice steady. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to be silent and depart from this place." Ethan lunged forward, not at me, but at the wall, his fist pounding against the scratch marks, leaving smears of blood from his knuckles. Sarah rushed to him, but he pushed her away with a strength that didn't match his lanky frame. Deacon James stepped in, gently restraining Ethan, while I continued the prayers. The shaking stopped, and Ethan collapsed, gasping, his body limp. The sulfur smell faded, but the air remained cold, heavy with the aftermath of the encounter. I knew we'd made progress, But Astaroth was far from defeated. I sat with the family afterward, explaining what had happened. "This was a test," I said. "Astaroth is trying to scare you, to make you doubt. But we pushed back today, and that's because of your faith." I gave Sarah a new prayer, the Memorare, to pray with Lily, emphasizing the Virgin Mary's protection. For Ethan, I recommended a confession, not because he was at fault, but to strengthen his soul against further attacks. I also urged Sarah to contact Dr. Carter again to monitor Ethan's mental state and to keep the house filled with blessed objects, crucifixes, holy water, anything to remind them of God's presence. As Deacon James and I left, the drizzle had turned to a steady rain, the drops pattering against the roof of my car. I looked back at the house, its windows dark, except for a faint glow in Ethan's room. I knew Astaroth was still there, watching, waiting for an opening. I'd seen this before. Demons don't give up easily, especially one as powerful as Astaroth. But I also knew that no evil, no matter how ancient, could stand against the power of Christ. I drove back to my parish, praying for the Thompsons, preparing for the next step, a formal exorcism, one that would require the full authority of the Church. The battle was far from over, but with faith as our shield, we would face it head on. The encounter with Astaroth in Ethan Thompson's bedroom had confirmed what I suspected. The Thompson family was not merely dealing with a haunted house, but a deliberate demonic oppression centered on one 4-year-old Ethan and, to a lesser extent, his 1 0-year-old sister, Lily. The malevolent presence of Astaroth, a demon known in ancient texts as a Grand Duke of Hell, was no longer a whisper but a roar, manifesting in physical disturbances and psychological torment. As Father Vincent Lampert, exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I knew the time for minor blessings had passed. This family needed the full power of the Church's rite of exorcism, and I needed to prepare them and myself for the battle ahead. After the unsettling events in Ethan's room, I contacted the Archdiocese to request permission for a formal exorcism. The process is rigorous, requiring detailed reports, witness statements, and approval from the bishop. I submitted Sarah Thompson's journal, my own observations, and Dr. Emily Carter's psychological evaluation, which noted Ethan's hostility and Lily's vivid nightmares about a man with no face. The bishop, after prayerful consideration, granted permission, but with a stern reminder, "Proceed with caution, Father. This is no ordinary case." I understood. Astaroth was a calculated adversary, one that thrived on fear and division. My training in Rome under Father Carmine de Philippus had taught me that humility, faith, and the authority of Christ were my greatest weapons, and I would need them all. I returned to the Thompson home on a cold November morning in 2006, the Indiana air sharp with the promise of winter. The house on Maple Street looked more worn than ever, its faded paint and sagging porch a reflection of the family's exhaustion. Sarah, 35, met me at the door, her face gaunt, her hands clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Behind her stood Margaret, her 6 0-year-old mother, whose rosary beads were now a constant presence, and Lily, who clung to a St. Michael medal I'd given her. Ethan was upstairs, refusing to come down, his door locked. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "He just sits there, staring at the wall. I don't know what to do, Father." And before beginning the exorcism, I gathered the family in the living room, where the crucifix above the fireplace hung straight, a small victory after its constant tilting. I explained what would happen. The rite of exorcism, as outlined in the Roman ritual, is a sacred prayer of the Church, invoking Christ's authority to expel evil. "This isn't about me fighting Astaroth," I said. "It's about Christ working through us. Your faith is crucial. Pray with me, stay strong, and don't give in to fear." Sarah nodded, though her eyes were filled with doubt. Margaret gripped her rosary, murmuring a prayer, while Lily whispered, "Will he go away, Father?" I smiled gently. "With God's help, yes. He's stronger than any demon." I had brought Deacon James again, along with 2 lay members of the parish, Mary and Thomas, both trained in prayer ministry and known for their unwavering faith. Their presence was vital not just for support, but to create a spiritual bulwark around the family. We set up in the living room, moving the furniture to clear a space. I placed a small altar on the coffee table, a crucifix, 2 lit candles, a vial of holy water, and a relic of St. Benedict. The air felt heavy, like a storm pressing down. Though the sky outside was clear, the temperature a brisk 45 Fahrenheit. Ethan had to be coaxed downstairs, his steps slow and reluctant. When he entered the room, his appearance shocked me. His face was pale, almost gray, his eyes sunken and rimmed with dark circles. He moved like someone carrying a weight, his shoulders hunched, his hands trembling. "I don't want this," he muttered, his voice low and hoarse. I placed a hand on his shoulder, praying silently, but he flinched as if my touch burned him. "Ethan," I said firmly, "we're doing this to help you. You're stronger than what's trying to hurt you." He didn't respond, but he sat in the chair we'd prepared, his hands gripping the armrest. I began the rite of exorcism, opening with the litany of the saints, calling on the intercession of Mary, Michael, the archangel, and all the saints. The family joined in, their voices soft but steady. As I transitioned to the prayers of exorcism, reciting in Latin, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the air, despite the furnace running. The candles flickered, their flames bending as if caught in a draft, though the windows were closed. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes locking on mine, and I saw it not the boy I'd met weeks ago, but something else, something ancient and malevolent. "You're wasting your time, Vincent," he growled, his voice layered with a deeper, guttural tone. "This boy is mine. This house is mine." I've heard demons speak before, and I know their tactics. Intimidate, mock, distract. I didn't engage. Instead, I raised the crucifix, its wood warm in my hand, and continued, "In nomine Jesu Christi, ego te, Astaroth, praecipio ut exias." In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, Astaroth, to depart. The room shook, a low rumble vibrating through the floorboards. The candles went out, plunging us into a dim twilight, though it was only 10 a.m., Sarah gasped, clutching Lily, while Margaret's prayers grew louder, her rosary beads clicking frantically. Deacon James and the prayer team stood firm, their voices joining mine in a chorus of faith. Ethan's body tensed, his hands clawing at the chair, leaving deep scratches in the wood. "You think your God can save him?" the voice snarled, now unmistakably not Ethan's. "I've broken stronger souls than yours." I sprinkled holy water, and Ethan recoiled, hissing like a cornered animal. The air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of sulfur, sharp and choking. Mary, one of the prayer team members, coughed but kept praying, her voice unwavering. I pressed on, reciting Psalm 68, "Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered." Ethan's body convulsed, his back arching unnaturally, his head thrashing from side to side. Sarah sobbed, trying to reach him, but Thomas gently held her back. "Let Father do his work," he whispered. The demon's resistance was fierce. Objects in the room began to move. A book slid off a shelf, landing with a thud. A picture frame tilted, then fell, its glass shattering on the hardwood floor. The crucifix above the fireplace swung violently, as if struck by an unseen hand. Lily screamed, burying her face in Sarah's chest, while Margaret's prayers grew more fervent. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners." I kept my focus on Ethan, commanding Astaroth to reveal its purpose. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my voice steady. "By the authority of Christ, speak." The response came in a guttural laugh, chilling in its malice. "To break them," it said, "to take their souls. This family is weak, and I am strong." I knew better than to believe a demon's lies. Astaroth was powerful, but not invincible. I continued the prayers, invoking the name of Jesus repeatedly, each utterance like a hammer striking stone. After nearly 2 hours, Ethan's convulsions slowed, his body slumping in the chair. The sulfur smell faded, and the room warmed slightly, though the candles remained extinguished. I approached Ethan, placing a hand on his forehead, praying for protection. He was sweating, his breathing ragged, but his eyes were his own again, filled with confusion and fear. "What happened?" he whispered, his voice weak. I ended the session with a prayer of thanksgiving, blessing the family and the house, but I knew this was only the first battle. Astaroth had retreated, not departed. I told Sarah to continue daily prayers, to attend Mass, and to keep holy water in every room. I also arranged for a priest from a neighboring parish, Father Paul, to visit regularly, reinforcing the family's spiritual defenses. As I left, the house felt lighter, but the weight of Astaroth's presence lingered, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Driving back to my parish, I reflected on the day's events. The exorcism had been intense, but it was a step forward. Astaroth was testing us, probing for weaknesses, but the family's faith, though shaken, held firm. I prayed for strength, for them, and for myself, knowing the next encounter would be even more challenging. The battle for the Thompsons' souls was far from over, but with Christ's power, we would prevail. The first formal exorcism in the Thompson family's home on Maple Street had shaken the grip of Astaroth, the Grand Duke of Hell, but it was clear the demon was far from defeated. The oppressive atmosphere in the house had lightened momentarily, but the battle for one 4-year-old Ethan, his one 0-year-old sister Lily, their mother Sarah, and their grandmother Margaret was intensifying. As Father Vincent Lampert, exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I knew that demons like Astaroth thrive on persistence, exploiting every crack in faith and resilience. The events that followed the initial rite would test the family's endurance and my own resolve, pushing us into a deeper confrontation with an ancient evil that refused to relinquish its hold. In the days after the exorcism, Sarah called me with a voice laced with panic. "It's getting worse, Father," she said, her words tumbling over each other. I thought we were making progress, but now it's like the house is fighting back. She described a series of new disturbances, each more alarming than the last. The night after the exorcism, the family woke to a rhythmic banging, like a hammer striking wood coming from the attic. Sarah and Margaret searched the cramped space, armed with flashlights and a crucifix, but found nothing, no loose pipes, no animals, just dust and cobwebs. Yet the banging continued for hours, stopping only at dawn. Another night, the thermostat spiked to 90 Fahrenheit without explanation, turning the house into a sweltering oven, while the windows frosted over as if it were mid-January instead of November's mild 40 Fahrenheit. Ethan's condition deteriorated further. The one 4-year-old, already withdrawn, began refusing to leave his room entirely. Sarah found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers covered in strange symbols, spirals, inverted crosses, and jagged lines that seemed to pulse under the dim light of his bedside lamp. When she tried to take them away, he snarled, "Don't touch them, he needs them." His voice, Sarah said, was not his own, carrying a low, guttural edge that made her skin crawl. Lily, meanwhile, was plagued by waking visions. The one 0-year-old told Sarah she saw Astaroth standing in the corner of her room, his faceless form cloaked in black, whispering her name. "He says he's coming for Ethan first," Lily cried, clutching the St. Michael medal I'd given her. "He says Ethan belongs to him now." Margaret, the family's rock, was not spared. The 6-0-year-old, whose faith had sustained her through decades of hardship, reported a terrifying incident. While praying the rosary alone in the living room, she felt a sudden pressure on her chest, as if an invisible hand were squeezing her heart. She gasped for air, dropping her beads, and saw a shadow move across the wall, a tall, shapeless figure that vanished when she called out, "Jesus, protect me." When she retrieved her rosary, the crucifix was bent, the metal warped as if heated and twisted. "I've never seen anything like it," she told me, her voice trembling but resolute. "I won't stop praying, Father, but I'm scared." I returned to the house a week after the first exorcism, this time accompanied by Deacon James and Father Paul, a fellow priest from a neighboring parish who had experience with spiritual warfare. The air outside was crisp, the Indiana sky a dull gray, with a wind that carried the bite of approaching winter. Inside, the house felt like a different world. The temperature was a clammy 50 Fahrenheit, despite the furnace running full blast. The smell of sulfur lingered, faint but persistent, mixing with a new odor, something metallic, like blood. Sarah met us at the door, her face etched with exhaustion. I don't know how much more we can take, she said, her hands wringing a dish towel. Ethan, he's slipping away. We found Ethan in his room, sitting in the center of the floor, his back to the door. The scratch marks on the wall had spread, now covering an entire section in a chaotic web of lines, some so deep they exposed the wooden studs beneath. The papers with symbols were gone, but in their place was a single sheet pinned to the wall with a kitchen knife. It bore a single word written in red ink that looked disturbingly like blood. Astaroth. I removed the knife, praying silently, and the air seemed to hum with resistance, a low vibration that set my teeth on edge. Ethan didn't move, but his breathing was shallow, his shoulders trembling. Ethan, I said, we're here to help you. Can you hear me? He turned slowly, his eyes glassy, and whispered, he's inside me, Father. I can't stop him. Before proceeding, I spoke with the family in the kitchen, away from Ethan's room. Sarah's journal detailed more incidents, a clock that chimed 13 times at midnight, a mirror in the hallway that reflected no one when they stood before it, and a persistent scratching sound from the walls, like claws digging into wood. Lily, clutching her stuffed rabbit, added, I saw him again, Father. He was standing over Ethan's bed last night, just watching him. Margaret, her face pale, showed me her rosary, the bent crucifix now wrapped in a cloth. I keep it with me, she said, but it feels heavy, like it's fighting something. I reassured them. The devil wants you to feel helpless, but you're not. Christ is with you, and his power is greater than any demon. I decided to perform a second minor exorcism, this time focusing on Ethan directly, though not yet a full rite of exorcism for a person, as that required further approval. We moved to the living room, setting up the same small altar. Crucifix, candles, holy water, and the Saint Benedict relic. Ethan was brought downstairs, supported by Father Paul, his body limp as if drained of strength. We seated him in a chair, his hands restrained gently with cloth to prevent him from hurting himself. Sarah, Lily, and Margaret sat nearby, their faces a mix of fear and determination, each holding a rosary I'd blessed. As I began the prayers, invoking the Holy Trinity and the Virgin Mary, the room darkened, the light from the windows dimming as if clouds had swallowed the sun. The candles flickered, their flames stretching unnaturally upward. Ethan's head lolled to one side, then snapped upright, his eyes fixed on me with a piercing intensity. You again, Vincent? A voice hissed, deep and resonant, not Ethan's. You're a fool to think you can banish me. I recognized Astaroth's taunts, designed to provoke fear and doubt. I ignored them, continuing the prayers. Exsurget Deus et dissipenter inimici eius. Let God arise and let his enemies be scattered. The reaction was immediate and violent. Ethan's body convulsed, his chair rocking as if pushed by an unseen force. The air grew thick with the smell of sulfur, now mixed with a rancid stench, like rotting flesh. The crucifix on the altar trembled, then fell, landing with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. Sarah cried out, but Margaret grabbed her hand, leading her in the Hail Mary, their voices rising above the chaos. Father Paul sprinkled holy water, and Ethan screamed a sound that was both human and inhuman, high-pitched and guttural, like two voices fighting for control. You cannot have him, I commanded, holding the crucifix aloft. In the name of Jesus Christ, Astaroth, I bind you and cast you out. The room shook, the walls creaking as if the house itself were groaning. A gust of wind, impossible in the sealed room, swept through, extinguishing the candles. Ethan's body lifted slightly, his feet hovering an inch off the floor, his arms straining against the restraints. Lily screamed, hiding her face, while Sarah sobbed, "Please, God, save my son." I pressed on, my voice steady, calling on the saints and angels to intercede. The shaking intensified, and then, abruptly, it stopped. Ethan collapsed, his body slumping forward, his breathing ragged but human again. The sulfur smell dissipated, and the room warmed, though the candles remained dark. I approached Ethan, placing a hand on his forehead, praying for protection. His skin was clammy, his pulse racing, but his eyes were clearer, filled with tears. "I saw him, Father," he whispered. He was right there laughing. I reassured him, You're safe now, Ethan. Christ is stronger. But I knew Astaroth was still present, weakened, but not gone. I blessed the family, giving Sarah a new prayer, the Anima Christi, to strengthen their resolve. I also instructed Margaret to lead nightly rosary prayers, emphasizing the power of communal faith. As we left, the house felt quieter, but the weight of Astaroth's presence lingered, like a storm waiting to break. I knew we needed another formal exorcism, one that would push deeper into the demon's hold. I prayed for the Thompsons, for strength and courage, and for myself, that I might be a worthy instrument of God's will. The battle was escalating, but with faith as our shield, we would face it unafraid. The Thompson family's struggle against Astaroth had reached a critical juncture. The first formal exorcism had weakened the demon's grip, but its presence lingered, a malignant force that continued to torment one 4-year-old Ethan, his one 0-year-old sister Lily, their mother Sarah, and their grandmother Margaret. The house on Maple Street, a modest one, 200 square foot home in a small Indiana town, was no longer a refuge, but a battlefield where faith was tested against an ancient evil. As Father Vincent Lampert, exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I knew that confronting Astaroth, a Grand Duke of Hell known for his cunning manipulation, required more than my own efforts. It demanded the strength of a community united in prayer, a collective stand against darkness that could bolster the family's faltering resolve. In the week following the first exorcism, the disturbances in the Thompson home took on a new intensity, as if Astaroth were retaliating for our challenge. Sarah's calls grew more desperate, her voice strained with exhaustion and fear. She described incidents that chilled me. The family woke one night to find every door in the house wide open, despite being locked before bed, with a cold draft carrying the stench of decay through the rooms. The thermostat read 45 Fahrenheit, though it was set to 70. Another evening, the television turned on by itself, cycling through static and distorted voices that seemed to whisper Ethan's name, even after Sarah unplugged it. Lily clutching her saint. Michael Metal reported waking to find her bed shaking as if someone were pushing it from below, though no one was there. He's angry, Father, she told Sarah. He says we're making him mad. Ethan's condition was the most alarming. The one 4-year-old had become a shadow of himself, his once bright eyes dull and distant. Sarah found him carving symbols into his desk with a pocket knife, muttering words she couldn't understand. When she tried to stop him, he pushed her against the wall with a force that left bruises on her arms. It wasn't Ethan, she told me, tears streaming down her face. His face, it twisted like something else was looking at me. Margaret, the family's 60-year-old matriarch, reported her own ordeal. While praying in her bedroom, she heard a voice, clear and cold, say, "You're next, old woman." The next morning, she found her Bible open to the book of Revelation, pages torn and smeared with a dark, oily substance. I knew we couldn't wait any longer. The first exorcism had shown Astaroth's strength, but also its vulnerability. Each prayer, each invocation of Christ's name had pushed it back. I contacted the Archdiocese to confirm the continuation of the exorcism process, providing updated reports of the escalating activity. The bishop, aware of the severity, urged me to proceed, but emphasized the need for a stronger spiritual presence. "Bring the community, Father," he said. "The devil hates unity." Drawing on my training in Rome, where I learned the power of collective faith under Father Carmine de Philippis, I decided to involve more members of the parish, creating a circle of prayer to support the family. I returned to the Thompson home on a gray, windy Saturday in late November 2006, the air heavy with the scent of impending snow. The house looked more desolate than ever, its windows dark, the yard littered with fallen leaves. Sarah greeted me, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a rosary. Lily sat on the couch, her stuffed rabbit abandoned, her eyes fixed on the floor. Margaret stood by the fireplace, her rosary beads moving steadily through her fingers, though her face was etched with worry. Ethan was upstairs, his door locked again. "He won't come out," Sarah said. "He says he's tired of fighting." I was joined by Deacon James, Father Paul, and a small group from St. Michael's Parish, Mary and Thomas, who had assisted before. and 2 others, Elizabeth and John, both known for their deep faith and experience in prayer ministry. Their presence was a reminder that the church is not just one priest, but a body of believers united against evil. We gathered in the living room, setting up the familiar altar, a crucifix, 2 candles, holy water, and the St. Benedict relic. The room felt colder than the 40-degree Fahrenheit outside, the air thick with a tension that made my skin prickle. I explained to the family that this second exorcism would focus on Ethan, but also on cleansing the house, reinforcing the spiritual defenses we'd established. Getting Ethan downstairs was a struggle. Father Paul and Thomas had to gently but firmly guide him, his body resisting as if pulled by an unseen force. When he entered the room, his appearance was shocking. His skin was ashen, his eyes bloodshot, and his movements jerky, like a puppet on strings. He sat in the chair, his hands gripping the armrests, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for something or someone. "Ethan," I said, my voice calm but authoritative, "we're here to free you. Trust in God." He didn't respond, but a low growl rumbled in his throat, a sound no human should make. We began with the litany of the saints, the voices of the prayer team rising in unison, filling the room with a warmth that countered the chill. As I transitioned to the exorcism prayers, reciting in Latin, the atmosphere shifted violently. The candles flared, their flames stretching nearly a foot high, casting wild shadows on the walls. The crucifix trembled, and a low hum vibrated through the floor, like the pulse of a distant machine. Ethan's body tensed, his head snapping back, his eyes rolling upward until only the whites were visible. "You're weak, Vincent," a voice bellowed deep and resonant, unmistakably Astaroth's for Senate. "This boy's soul is mine, and you cannot take it." I didn't flinch. Demons thrive on fear, and I faced their taunts before. Holding the crucifix, I continued, "In nomine Jesu Christi ego te Astaroth praecipio ut exeas." In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to depart. The room erupted in chaos. The windows rattled as if pounded by a storm, though the wind outside was calm. A stack of books on a nearby shelf toppled, pages fluttering open to random verses, some torn in half. Sarah gasped, clutching Lily, who buried her face in her mother's arms, whispering the Hail Mary. Margaret led the prayer team, her voice steady despite the chaos, reciting the rosary with a fervor that anchored us all. Ethan's body convulsed, his chair scraping across the floor, leaving gouges in the hardwood. "You cannot win," Astaroth roared, its voice echoing as if from every corner of the room. I sprinkled holy water, and Ethan screamed, his body arching backward, his feet kicking wildly. The air grew heavy with the stench of sulfur, now mixed with a sharp, metallic tang like blood and rust. The candles extinguished themselves, plunging the room into a dim gloom, though sunlight should have streamed through the windows. Father Paul held the St. Benedict relic, praying for protection, while Elizabeth and John flanked Ethan, their hands raised in supplication. Then came the most terrifying moment. A wooden crucifix on the wall, one Margaret had hung years ago, burst into flames, not a slow burn, but a sudden blaze that lit up the room. Sarah screamed, and Thomas rushed to douse it with a blanket, but the fire died as quickly as it started, leaving the crucifix charred but intact. Astaroth's laughter filled the room, a chilling sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You see my power, priest?" it mocked. "Your God is nothing." I ignored the taunt, focusing on the prayers, my voice rising. "By the power of Jesus Christ, I bind you, Astaroth, and cast you into the abyss." The prayer team's voices grew louder, their unity a shield against the demon's onslaught. After nearly 3 hours, Ethan's convulsions slowed, his body slumping forward, drenched in sweat. The sulfur smell faded, and the room warmed slightly, though the charred crucifix remained a stark reminder of Astaroth's presence. I approached Ethan, placing a hand on his forehead, praying the Anima Christi. His eyes fluttered open, filled with tears. "I felt him leave," he whispered, his voice weak but his own. "But he's still here, Father. I can feel him." I ended the session with a blessing, anointing the family with holy oil and sprinkling holy water throughout the house. I urged Sarah to continue daily prayers, emphasizing the memorare and the rosary, and to keep Father Paul's visits regular. As we left, the house felt quieter, but the weight of Astaroth's presence lingered like a predator waiting in the shadows. I knew we'd struck a blow, but the demon was far from vanquished. Driving back to my parish, I prayed for the Thompsons, for the strength to endure, and for the grace to see this battle through. The power of community had held us together, but the final confrontation with Astaroth loomed, and we would need every ounce of faith to prevail. The second exorcism had pushed Astaroth back, its grip on the Thompson family weakened by the unified prayers of the community and the power of Christ's name. Yet, the demon's presence lingered in the house on Maple Street, a malevolent force that refused to be fully expelled. The toll on Sarah, a 3-5-year-old mother fighting to protect her children, Ethan, 14, and Lily, 10, was evident. Margaret, their 60-year-old grandmother, held fast to her faith, but the strain of the battle was wearing her down. As Father Vincent Lampert, exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I knew that Astaroth, a Grand Duke of Hell, known for his cunning and relentless manipulation, was preparing for a final stand. The third exorcism would be our last chance to free the family, and it would demand every ounce of faith, courage, and divine grace. In the days following the second exorcism, the disturbances in the Thompson home took on a sinister new character, as if Astaroth were gathering strength for a final assault. Sarah's reports were chilling. The family woke one night to find every clock in the house stopped at 3 a.m., the hour often associated with demonic activity, mocking the hour of Christ's death. The next day, the mirrors in the house reflected distorted images, faces stretched, eyes hollow, as if the glass itself were warped by an unseen force. Sarah wrote in her journal, "It's like the house is alive, Father, and it hates us." The temperature fluctuated wildly, swinging from a stifling 85-degree Fahrenheit to a bone-chilling 40-degree Fahrenheit within minutes, despite the thermostat remaining untouched. Ethan's condition had become critical. The 4-year-old, once a vibrant boy, was now a shell, his body frail from refusing food and his eyes haunted by something beyond his years. Sarah found him one night standing in the backyard, barefoot in the 30-degree Fahrenheit cold, staring at the ground where a patch of grass had turned black and withered as if burned. When she asked what he was doing, he replied in a monotone, "He's calling me. He says it's time." Lily, meanwhile, was tormented by nightmares that left her screaming, her voice hoarse from crying out Astaroth's name. She told Sarah she saw the demon standing at the foot of her bed, his faceless form cloaked in black, whispering promises of power if she surrendered her soul. "I told him no," Lily said, clutching her St. Michael medal, "but he keeps coming back." Margaret's health was failing under the strain. The 60-year-old, whose rosary had been her anchor, reported dizzy spells and chest pains, which she attributed to the spiritual weight of the house. One morning, she found her prayer book open to a passage from Job, the pages stained with a red, viscous liquid that smelled of iron. "I'm not afraid of dying," she told Sarah, "but I'm afraid for Ethan and Lily." Her words echoed in my mind as I prepared for the third exorcism, knowing that Astaroth was targeting the family's weakest points, seeking to break their spirit before we could break its hold. I returned to the Thompson home on a stormy December afternoon in 2006, the sky heavy with dark clouds and a wind that howled through the bare trees. The house looked gaunt, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the world. Sarah greeted me, her face drawn, her hands clutching a new rosary I'd given her after the last session. Lily sat on the couch, her eyes red from crying, while Margaret stood by the fireplace, her prayers a steady murmur. Ethan was upstairs, his door barricaded with furniture, a sign of his increasing resistance. "He says he doesn't want to see you," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "He says you're making it worse." I was joined by Father Paul, Deacon James, and the same prayer team, Mary, Thomas, Elizabeth, and John, whose faith had been a bulwark in the previous session. I also brought a relic of St. John Vianney, a powerful intercessor against demonic forces, to strengthen our efforts. We set up in the living room, the altar adorned with a crucifix, candles, holy water, and the relics of St. Benedict and St. John Vianney. The air was thick, the temperature a clammy 50-degree Fahrenheit despite the furnace's hum. The charred crucifix from the last session still hung above the fireplace, a stark reminder of Astaroth's defiance. Convincing Ethan to come downstairs took nearly an hour. Father Paul and Thomas had to move the furniture blocking his door, and when they entered, they found him curled up on the floor, surrounded by papers scrawled with the same jagged symbols we'd seen before. His eyes were wild, his voice a whisper, "He's not done with me." They guided him to the living room, his steps unsteady, his body trembling as if fighting an internal war. We seated him in the chair, his wrists gently bound with cloth to prevent harm. Sarah held Lily close, while Margaret led the family in the Hail Mary, her voice a beacon in the gathering storm. I began the third exorcism, opening with the prayer to St. Michael, the prayer team's voices rising in unison. The candles flickered, their light casting long shadows that seemed to twist and move. As I transitioned to the rite of exorcism, reciting in Latin, the room erupted in chaos. The windows shook, the glass rattling as if struck by a gale, though the storm outside was calm. The air grew heavy with the stench of sulfur, now laced with a putrid, rotting smell that made Elizabeth gag. Ethan's body stiffened, his head snapping back, his eyes rolling upward until only the whites were visible. "You're too late, Vincent," a voice roared, deep and resonant, filling the room with a palpable malice. "This boy is mine, and you will all fall." I held the crucifix, its wood steady in my hand, and continued, "In nomine Jesu Christi, ego te, Astaroth, praecipio ut exias, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to depart." The reaction was immediate. Ethan's chair lifted an inch off the floor, hovering briefly before crashing down, the impact shaking the room. The candles went out, plunging us into darkness, though a faint glow from the relics seemed to pulse with light. Sarah screamed, clutching Lily, who sobbed, "Make him stop, Father." Margaret's prayers grew louder, her rosary beads clicking as she invoked the Virgin Mary. Father Paul sprinkled holy water, and Ethan shrieked, his body thrashing against the restraints, his voice a mix of his own and Astaroth's, "You can't take me, I am eternal." And the prayer team stood firm, their voices a chorus of faith that cut through the chaos. I pressed on, invoking the names of Christ, Mary, and the saints, each word a blow against the demon's hold. The room trembled, the walls creaking as if the house itself were resisting. A sudden gust of wind swept through, impossible in the sealed space, knocking books off shelves and scattering papers. The charred crucifix above the fireplace swung violently, then stopped, hanging perfectly still. Astaroth's voice grew desperate, its taunts turning to pleas. "Leave me be, priest. You cannot win." But I knew its desperation was a sign of weakness. Demons fight hardest when they're losing. After nearly 4 hours, the air began to clear, the sulfur stench fading. Ethan's convulsions slowed, his body slumping forward, drenched in sweat. I approached him, placing the St. John Vianney relic on his chest, praying the Anima Christi. His eyes opened, clear for the first time in weeks, filled with tears. "He's gone," he whispered, his voice trembling but human. "I don't feel him anymore." The room warmed, the candles relighting themselves, their flames steady and bright. Sarah rushed to Ethan, embracing him, while Lily clung to her mother, sobbing with relief. Margaret fell to her knees, thanking God, her rosary pressed to her lips. I ended the session with a blessing, anointing the family and the house with holy oil. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted, but I knew the battle had taken its toll. I instructed Sarah to continue daily prayers, to attend Mass weekly, and to keep the relics and holy water in the house. As we left, the storm outside had broken, the clouds parting to reveal a pale winter sun. The house on Maple Street stood quiet, but I knew the scars of this battle would linger. Astaroth was gone, but the family's healing was just beginning. I prayed for their strength, trusting in Christ's victory, and prepared for the aftermath of a battle won, but not without cost. The third exorcism had driven Astaroth from the Thompson family's home on Maple Street, a victory won through the power of Christ and the unwavering faith of a community united in prayer. The oppressive presence that had tormented one 4-year-old Ethan, his one 0-year-old sister Lily, Their 3 5-year-old mother, Sarah, and their 6 0-year-old grandmother, Margaret, was gone, leaving behind a house that felt quieter, lighter, but not untouched by the scars of the battle. As Father Vincent Lampert, exorcist for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, I knew that expelling a demon like Astaroth, a Grand Duke of Hell known for his cunning and malice, was only part of the work. The aftermath of such a spiritual battle is often where the true healing begins, where faith must be rebuilt, and where the family must learn to live in the light of Christ after dwelling in darkness. In the days following the final exorcism, the Thompson home was eerily calm, as if the house itself were catching its breath. Sarah reported no new disturbances, no footsteps in the night, no sulfuric stench, no mirrors reflecting distorted faces. The clocks ticked normally, the thermostat held steady at 68° Fahrenheit, and the charred crucifix above the fireplace remained still, a silent testament to the battle we'd fought. Yet, the absence of Astaroth's overt presence did not mean the family was whole. The trauma of the past months had left deep wounds, not just in their spirits, but in their relationships, their trust, and their sense of safety. My role now was to guide them toward healing, to help them reclaim their lives through faith, prayer, and the sacraments. Sarah, exhausted and emotionally drained, struggled to find her footing. The 3 5-year-old mother had fought fiercely for her children, but the weight of the ordeal had pushed her into a quiet despair. She confided in me during a follow-up visit, her voice barely above a whisper as we sat at the kitchen table, a single bulb casting a soft glow over the room. "I keep waiting for it to come back, Father," she said, her hands clasped around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "Every creak, every shadow, I'm afraid it's not over." I understood her fear. Demonic oppression leaves a lingering dread, a sense that the evil could return at any moment. I reassured her. "Astaroth is gone, Sarah. Christ's power expelled it. But the devil leaves scars, and those take time to heal. Keep praying, keep going to Mass, and let God's love fill those empty places." Ethan's recovery was the most uncertain. The 1 4-year-old had been Astaroth's primary target, his body and mind a battleground for the demon's manipulations. After the exorcism, he was quieter, his once lively spirit subdued by memories of the darkness that had consumed him. Sarah found him staring out his bedroom window at night, as if searching for something in the dark. When I spoke with him, his eyes were heavy with guilt. "I let it in, Father," he said, his voice cracking. "I was angry about Mom and Dad's divorce, about moving here. I felt alone. And then I heard him promising me things. I placed a hand on his shoulder, praying silently. 'Ethan,' I said, 'the devil preys on our weaknesses, but God's mercy is greater. You didn't invite this, you were targeted. Confession and prayer will help you heal.' I arranged for him to meet with Father Paul for regular spiritual direction, and I encouraged Sarah to continue his therapy with Dr. Emily Carter, blending faith and professional support to rebuild his strength. Lily, at 10 years old, showed remarkable resilience, though her innocence had been shaken. She no longer saw Astaroth in her dreams, but she clung to her St. Michael medal, refusing to sleep without it. During one of my visits, she showed me a new drawing, not the jagged symbols of the demon, but a bright sketch of a church with a glowing cross. "This is where I feel safe," she said, her voice soft but steady. I smiled, seeing the light of faith in her eyes, and gave her a small statue of the Virgin Mary to keep by her bed. "She's your mother in heaven," I told her. "She'll always protect you." Lily's faith, though tested, was a reminder of the purity that demons like Astaroth seek to corrupt but cannot destroy when guarded by God's grace. Margaret's health, however, was a growing concern. The 6 0-year-old, whose rosary had been her lifeline through the ordeal, was weakened by the physical and spiritual toll. The chest pains she'd experienced during the height of Astaroth's attacks persisted, and a visit to the doctor revealed a heart condition exacerbated by stress. One evening, as she sat with Sarah in the living room, she collapsed, clutching her chest. Sarah called an ambulance, but by the time they reached the hospital, Margaret was gone, her heart giving out under the strain. The family was devastated, believing the demonic oppression had contributed to her death. At her funeral, I offered the Mass, speaking of Margaret's unyielding faith, her courage in the face of evil, and her place now in God's embrace. She fought for you, I told Sarah, Ethan, and Lily, and her prayers helped save you. Honor her by living in faith. Upset. The loss of Margaret cast a shadow over the family, but it also galvanized their resolve. Sarah began attending Mass daily, finding solace in the Eucharist and the community at St. Michael's Parish. She placed the statue of the Virgin Mary in the living room, alongside a new crucifix, and kept holy water in every room. Ethan, though still haunted by memories, started opening up in therapy, working through the anger and guilt that had made him vulnerable. He joined a youth group at the parish, finding strength in new friendships and the guidance of Father Paul. Lily, with her childlike faith, became the family's anchor, leading them in the rosary each night, her small voice a beacon of hope. I visited the Thompson home regularly over the next few weeks, ensuring that the spiritual protections remained strong. The house felt different now, warmer, lighter, as if the very walls had exhaled the darkness. The charred crucifix, which Sarah kept as a reminder of God's victory, no longer moved. The mirrors reflected normally, the clocks ticked steadily, and the air was free of the sulfuric stench. Yet, I knew the family's healing would be a journey. I taught them the prayer of St. Francis, emphasizing peace and forgiveness, and encouraged them to make their home a place of prayer and love. The devil can only enter where he's invited, I said. Fill this house with God, and there will be no room for evil. The story of the Thompson family spread quietly through the community, not as a sensational tale, but as a testament to faith's triumph over darkness. Some skeptics dismissed it as psychological trauma or superstition, but those who had been there, Father Paul, Deacon James, the prayer team, knew the truth. Astaroth had been real, its power formidable, but Christ's authority was greater. I submitted a final report to the Archdiocese, detailing the exorcisms and the family's recovery, and received the bishop's blessing to close the case. The house on Maple Street was eventually sold, the new owners unaware of its history, but Sarah, Ethan, and Lily moved to a new home, carrying with them the lessons of faith and resilience. As I reflect on this case, I'm reminded of what I learned in Rome. An exorcist's work is not about battling demons for glory, but about guiding souls back to God. Astaroth sought to break the Thompsons to exploit their pain and fear, but it underestimated the power of faith, community, and Christ's love. I carry their story with me, a reminder that no darkness is too great when we stand with God. To anyone facing their own struggles, I offer this: pray without ceasing, cling to the sacraments, and trust in the one who conquered death. For in the end, as I told Sarah, Ethan, and Lily, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.